USS Arizona. The USS Arizona was a Pennsylvania-class battleship commissioned in 1916 and one of the strongest ships in the U.S. Navy during its time. Armed with 12 14-inch guns and a crew of over 1,500, it was considered a symbol of American naval power in the Pacific. Stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the Arizona was part of the Pacific Fleet when, on December 7, 1941, it became the victim of a surprise attack by the Imperial Japanese Navy. That fateful day began like any other. But by 7:55 a.m., the calm of a Sunday morning was destroyed as Japanese bombers landed upon Pearl Harbor. Arizona's crew rushed to battle stations as the first wave of attacks began. Torpedo bombers launched their strikes and the Arizona came under fire. At 8:06 a.m., a bomb hit the ship's forward section near Turret 2. This was the start of the ship's destruction. The bomb likely tore through the ship's armored deck and detonated in the forward magazine, starting a chain reaction. The explosion was so intense that it tore Arizona apart and triggered fires on nearby ships. The forward part of the ship, including its turrets and mast, collapsed into the wreckage. The blast went on for 2 days and claimed the lives of 1,177 of Arizona's 1,512 crew members, nearly half of the total casualties from the entire attack on Pearl Harbor. USS Oklahoma, 1941. The USS Oklahoma, a battleship commissioned on May 2, 1916, was a proud stalwart of the Pacific Fleet. It served during World War I and continued its duty in the years leading up to World War II, making its way into the Pacific Fleet by 1936. Stationed at Pearl Harbor by December 1941, Oklahoma was positioned alongside other battleships on Battleship Row, a prime target for the Japanese forces that launched their surprise attack that morning. On December 7, 1941 at 7:56 a.m., the Oklahoma was struck by as many as 9 torpedoes in rapid succession. The first hit caused an explosion that flooded the forward sections of the ship, knocking out power and making the ship unsteady. Another torpedo hit near the ship's engine rooms, further compromising its stability. Within just 12 minutes of the first strike, the Oklahoma capsized, rolling over and trapping hundreds of men below deck. As the ship turned upside down, water poured into the ship's lower decks, leaving sailors fighting for their lives in pitch-dark compartments. The immediate rescue efforts began almost as soon as the ship capsized. Over the next 2 days, 32 men were rescued from the wreckage, many of them alive, but the damage to Oklahoma was tragic. After the attack, the Navy was able to conduct recovery operations, but the battleship's structural damage was too severe to repair. By 1943, engineers had succeeded in righting the Oklahoma, but the ship was beyond return to service. In September 1944, the Oklahoma was decommissioned, and it was sold for scrap. However, fate had another tragic chapter in store. On May 17, 1947, as Oklahoma was being towed to the west coast to be dismantled, the ship sank in a storm off the coast of Alaska, permanently lost to the deep. Yamato, 1945. On April 7, 1945, the Japanese super battleship Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, went on a mission that was as doomed as it was desperate. The mission, called Operation Tenichigo, or Heaven No. 1, was a last-ditch attempt by the Japanese Imperial Navy to stop the U.S. invasion of Okinawa. It was a suicide mission from the start, with Yamato, along with a light cruiser and 8 destroyers, tasked with attacking the U.S. fleet in a bid to inflict as much damage as possible before getting destroyed. Armed with 9 18.1-inch guns, its primary weapons could launch a 3,200-pound shell over 22 miles. This ship was nearly invincible, but by 1945, Japan's naval power was all but destroyed, and the Yamato was left with limited air cover and no real support to counter U.S. forces. The plan was for the fleet to sail to Okinawa, sinking as many U.S. troop transports as possible before beached, continuing to fight until the last man. On the morning of April 7th, Yamato was spotted by American reconnaissance planes, and the U.S. Navy quickly launched an aerial assault. At approximately noon, the first wave of attacks began. Aircraft from the U.S. Carrier Task Force, including dive bombers and torpedo bombers, began their assault on the battleship. The Yamato fought back, but its defensive capabilities were no match for the scale of the American assault. The Yamato took hit after hit. Torpedoes struck the ship's sides, flooding its lower decks, and bombs exploded above, causing massive fires and further damage. As the damage mounted, the ship began to list, and her fate was sealed. Despite efforts to stay afloat and counter the damage, the Yamato was doomed. At around 2 p.m., the Yamato's crew was ordered to abandon ship, but many of the crew members were trapped below deck, unable to escape. Just before 3 p.m., after taking over 30 bomb and torpedo hits, the ship sank. The exact number of casualties is difficult to determine, but it's estimated that between 2,400 and 3,000 of the 3,300 crew members died with the ship. Bismarck 1941. On May 19, 1941, the mighty Bismarck, the largest battleship of its time, set sail on its maiden voyage. This was the beginning of a mission so daring that it would amaze the world for years to come. The Bismarck, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, was part of a top-secret operation codenamed Operation Rheinübung. Their goal? To sever the vital lifeline between Great Britain and the United States by attacking Allied convoys across the North Atlantic, which carried essential supplies like oil and food. The Nazis believed their unsinkable battleship would force Britain into submission by cutting off these vital resources. The British quickly became aware of the Bismarck's movements and dispatched a fleet to hunt it down. Among them were newly commissioned battleships HMS Prince of Wales and the legendary HMS Hood. On May 24th, the two British ships confronted the Bismarck in the Denmark Strait, situated between Greenland and Iceland. The Hood, despite its reputation, fired the first shots, but its shells missed their target. As the battle grew, the Bismarck returned fire, and within minutes, a shell from the German battleship struck Hood's ammunition magazine. This caused a huge explosion, and the Hood sank almost immediately, taking 1,418 of its crew with it. Only 3 men survived. Though victorious in this initial engagement, the Bismarck was not without damage. It had suffered significant hits and was leaking oil, which forced Admiral Gunther Lütjen, the commander of the German fleet, to abandon the chase of the Prince of Wales. Instead, he ordered a return to port in Nazi-occupied France. Meanwhile, British Admiral John Tovey, determined to avenge the loss of Hood, sent every available ship from the British home fleet to track down the Bismarck before it could reach the safety of German-occupied ports. On May 26, the British launched an attack from the HMS Ark Royal, an aircraft carrier. Despite poor weather conditions, British Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers successfully located the Bismarck and launched a series of torpedo strikes. The bombers' slow, outdated planes were an easy target for the Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns, but their torpedoes hit the battleship's rudders. This disabled the ship's ability to steer, leaving it helpless as it circled aimlessly in the vast Atlantic. After Bismarck was declared defenseless, the British warships closed in, and by the morning of May 27th, they let out a final barrage of artillery. For over an hour, the Bismarck was pounded by British fire. At around 10:40 a.m., a combination of the British salvo and a deliberate scuttling order from the Germans led to the Bismarck sinking. In the end, only 110 of the 2,100 crew members survived. The once feared battleship was lost less than 10 days after it had first set sail. HMS Hood, 1941. On May 24, 1941, during the Battle of the Denmark Strait, Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, was engaged by the German battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. What followed was a quick and tragic end for the British battlecruiser. The battle started as Hood, accompanied by the battleship Prince of Wales, intercepted the German squadron. Despite Admiral Holland's intent to minimize Hood's vulnerability to plunging fire, his decision to maintain a direct course compromised the ability of the British ships to bring all their guns to bear. At approximately 5:55 a.m., Bismarck opened fire on Hood. Initially, the British targeted the wrong ship, focusing on Prinz Eugen, allowing Bismarck the opportunity to zero in. Meanwhile, Prinz Eugen's high explosive shells caused a fire on Hood's deck near the anti-aircraft ammunition lockers. This blaze further exposed Hood to disaster. At 6 a.m., Bismarck fired a salvo that sealed Hood's fate. One of the German shells struck near Hood's aft magazines. Eyewitnesses described a flash, followed by a massive explosion that ripped the ship apart. The aft section disintegrated instantly, and Hood broke in two. Within 3 minutes, the forward section was submerged, dragging 1,415 crewmen to their deaths. Only 3 sailors survived the sinking. The loss of Hood shocked the British public and spurred an intense hunt for Bismarck. Within days, the Royal Navy avenged Hood by sinking Bismarck. Despite this, Hood's demise became a story of the vulnerabilities that come with aging battlecruiser designs when faced with modern battleship firepower. Tirpitz, 1944. The destruction of the German battleship Tirpitz, once titled the pride of Hitler's navy, was one of the longest and most persistent military operations of World War II. Dubbed the Beast by Winston Churchill, the Tirpitz was a 52,000-ton heavily armored ship with 15-inch guns that could hit targets 22 miles away and achieve speeds of 34 knots. Her presence in the Atlantic and Arctic posed a strong threat to Allied convoys, forcing the Allies to commit enormous rescues to her elimination during many years. In 1943, the Tirpitz was anchored in Kåfjord, a remote and well-fortified fjord in northern Norway. Attempts to destroy her became increasingly strong. British midget submarines in Operation Source managed to damage her significantly by planting explosive charges beneath the hull. However, she was not fully disabled. On the 12th of November 1944, the RAF launched its decisive strike. 30 Lancasters suffered icy conditions, but took off from Scotland. They reached Tromsø under a clear sky. 2 direct hits and 1 near miss, which were delivered by tallboys, caused major damage. 1 bomb tore through the armored deck, lighting ammunition stores and splitting the vessel in 2. The Tirpitz capsized, trapping over 1,000 crew members inside her hull. The sinking of the Tirpitz marked the end of a 4-year campaign. For the Allies, her destruction eliminated a major threat to Arctic convoys and freed resources for other operations. Churchill's Beast had finally been slain, making the Tirpitz a signature of the effort required to neutralize Nazi Germany's strongest naval weapon. Mutsu, 1943. The Mutsu was a Japanese battleship of the Nagato class, commissioned in 1921 and named after the Mutsu province. At the time of its construction, it was one of the most advanced battleships in the world, boasting a length of 224.94 meters, a displacement of over 39,000 tons, and a speed of 26 knots. It was armed with 8 16-inch guns, a feature that gave it strong firepower and made it a symbol of Japan's rising naval ability. The Mutsu had relatively uneventful combat history, missing out on key early World War II operations like the attack on Pearl Harbor. It served primarily in training roles and fleet stunts. However, the ship's fate took a tragic turn on June 8, 1943. While anchored in Hiroshima Bay, an enormous explosion erupted in the No. 3 turret, splitting the battleship in 2. The forward section sank almost instantly, while the aft section floated shortly before succumbing to the waves several hours later. The explosion was deafening, claiming the lives of 1,121 of the 1,474 on board, including sailors, trainees, and civilians, making it one of the deadliest peacetime naval disasters in history. The exact cause of the explosion remains unknown. Initial Japanese investigations suggested sabotage. Other theories propose that the explosion resulted from an accidental fire in the ammunition magazine, potentially caused by poor handling of volatile cordite or a spark generated during maintenance. Musashi, 1944. The Musashi was no ordinary battleship. It was a floating empire of Japan's naval supremacy and wartime ambition. Commissioned in August 1942, this sister ship to the legendary Yamato was a masterpiece of engineering constructed in Nagasaki. Stretching around 862 feet and displacing nearly 73,000 tons, the Musashi was armed with the largest naval guns ever built. 9 gigantic 18.1-inch cannons capable of hurling shells over 26 miles. With a crew of 2,500 and reinforced by layers of armor thought to be impenetrable, it was designed to dominate the seas and protect the Empire's ambitions in the Pacific. Its final voyage in October 1944 was designed to be legendary. As part of the Japanese center force during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Musashi sailed into the Sibuyan Sea, aiming to crush the Allied invasion at Leyte. But it was there, under the force of U.S. carrier planes, that it might begin to fall. 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs tore through its armor, destroying the massive battleship. For hours, the crew fought desperately to keep it afloat, but as the waters of the Sibuyan Sea swallowed the ship, it became clear that no amount of courage or skill could save it. By late afternoon on October 24, 1944, the once mighty Musashi began to sink heavily to one side. It sank in the deep waters, taking with it over 1,000 lives. HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, 1941. On December 10, 1941, the British naval force known as Force C, containing the HMS Prince of Wales, a King George V-class battleship, and the HMS Repulse, a battlecruiser, was sent to intercept the advancing Japanese invasion fleet near Malaya, just 2 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The task force had been ordered to prevent the Japanese from completing their land invasion, but the British fleet faced a difficulty: a lack of air cover. The British ships were alone, with no aircraft carriers or supporting planes, which would soon prove tragic. In the early morning hours, the Japanese had already launched their offensive, sending bombers and torpedo bombers from their air bases in French Indochina to target the British fleet. The first wave, consisting of 12 torpedo bombers from the 22nd Air Flotilla, attacked HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse around 11 a.m. Despite the fact that the British ship's radar system had detected the incoming aircraft, there was little they could do to defend against the well-coordinated attack. The Prince of Wales was the first target. The Japanese torpedo bombers launched their assault, hitting the ship with multiple torpedoes. The Prince of Wales was severely damaged as the torpedoes caused massive flooding, tearing her propulsion system. Although the ship's crew fought to maintain power and keep her afloat, the Prince of Wales was declared nearly immobile. The crew tried to continue firing at the incoming planes, but the situation quickly became impossible. Meanwhile, the Repulse, though moving at a faster speed, was also under attack by a second wave of torpedo bombers. The Repulse was hit by multiple torpedoes, which caused a lot of damage. The first torpedo struck her starboard side, flooding several compartments and causing a major list to port. Despite efforts to control the flooding, further torpedo hits ensured that the battlecruiser would not survive. The Repulse was sinking rapidly, and at 12:33 p.m., she went down, taking with her more than 500 of her crew. While these attacks were occurring, the remaining destroyers in the force attempted to provide some defense and rescue efforts. However, the air superiority of the Japanese proved overwhelming. The Prince of Wales managed to stay afloat for a little longer despite her severe damage, but the continuous attacks from Japanese bombers and torpedo bombers eventually led to her sinking at 3:18 p.m., just 48 minutes after the Repulse had gone down.